Members leaving and perhaps coming into the chamber, that social distancing measures are in place, so please take care. The next item of business is a statement by Michael Russell on Brexit update. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of his statement, and so there should be no interventions or interruptions. And I call on Michael Russell for up to 10 minutes, please, Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, when I last addressed this chamber on the readiness for the state of the transition period, I found it scarcely believable that with only 23 days to go, we knew nothing about how the UK would trade with the EU. Now, with a mere 8 days to go and still no outcome, I would say that my reaction, and that of almost everybody else, is that we are now in the realm of the unbelievable. Presiding Officer, even if a deal is being done as we speak, and I have no information that that is the case, then time has run out for Westminster to approve the legislation before Christmas, and for this chamber to consider the necessary legislative consent to aspects of the deal that will be required. Of course, we do not know what would be in a deal, so where our consent would be required is also not clear. The UK government will have to formally ask us for that consent, and this chamber will in turn, of course, be asked to agree or disagree. Practically, it seems clear that the earliest that can now happen is next Wednesday, and the Minister for Parliamentary Business will keep you, Presiding Officer, and the Bureau closely informed, and will notify you the moment the Scottish Government receives any requests for legislative consent, if it does. This also means, of course, that if Westminster has to be recalled, it would be under stringent Tier 4 lockdown regulations, and the same would be true here and across Scotland. The evidence of the last few days tells us not only that the pressure of the pandemic is increasing again, but also that the UK Government's refusal to extend transition, despite all the pleas, was utterly foolish, reckless, arrogant, and very damaging. In addition, the last 48 hours remind us of the dependence of our supply chains and our way of life on the closest of trading links with the EU, and show that any action which disrupts that has severe consequences. Presiding Officer, if there is no deal, then disruption will resume. That is one of the many reasons why a no deal is a lunatic prospect. And anyone who asserts in any part of these islands that we will prosper mightily in such circumstances is either woefully ignorant or deliberately deceiving. For a Prime Minister to do so beggars belief. But even with a deal, the lowest of deals, which is and has been throughout the last year all that could be achieved given the UK red lines, there will be disruption to trade and a major dislocating change in our status and relationship with other countries. There will be, no deal or low deal, a diminution in our safety and protection with regard to law and order, given the withdrawal from us of the Schengen Information System, which means Police Scotland will be less able to combat criminality at speed. We'll also lose access to the European arrest warrant, which means it will be far harder to ensure that foreign criminals face justice in Scotland. There will be, no deal or low deal, a growing threat to the standards we apply and expect to food, the environment and a range of other issues, though we will be able to mitigate some of that as a result of the passage last night of the EU Continuity Bill by a massive majority here, which I hope the UK Government will not again try and destroy by means of changing UK law. Food prices will rise, no deal or low deal, as is admitted by the UK Government, and range and availability may be affected, particularly in the early days after the 31st of December. That will be felt most keenly at the end of supply chains, which means in Scotland. It will also be harder for Scots to live and work in the European Union, and visas are now required for prolonged stays overseas. Even a simple holiday, something we've taken for granted for so long, will mean longer queues at borders and paying more for health insurance. And there will be a shortage of labour in some key Scottish sectors, which will get worse as the growing season starts. There will also be, no deal or low deal, an inevitable fall in our GDP. Even in the very best case scenario of a basic trade agreement outcome, our modelling shows that Scottish GDP is estimated to be 6.1% lower by 2030 compared to continued EU membership. This equates to the cost of each person in Scotland of an equivalent of £1,600. A catastrophic exit on WTO terms only could lead to a loss of up to 8.5% of GDP in Scotland by 2030 compared to continued EU membership, equivalent to £2,300 per person. My definition of prospering mightily does not include losing £2,300 for every man, woman and child in Scotland. But some impacts will be felt almost immediately. Presiding Officer, on the 8th of December, I set out what the Scottish Government is doing, as far as it is able, to mitigate the worst effects at the end of transition, which will produce immediate changes, low deal or no deal. I can therefore report that the Scottish Government resilience room arrangements for EU exit and concurrent risk are now fully established, The stand-up of the National Coordination Centre and the single Scotland-wide multi-agency coordination centre is well underway. These arrangements put us in the best possible position to deal in a coordinated way with the impact of EU exit, the concurrent risks of COVID-19 and winter weather. We've already made use of them this week when considering the possible effects of the short straits situation. We are also fully focused now on protecting people, protecting imports and exports of essential goods, minimising economic impact and ensuring necessary legislative changes are in place as far as we are able to do so. We continue to do everything we can to protect vulnerable people, our communities in the third sector, through a £100 million package of support measures. We are, as we said we would, providing £5 million worth of support to Scottish wholesale food and drink businesses to help support food supplies across the country. We will now need to do more, particularly with respect to the shellfish and fishing sectors badly affected this week. We're doing all we can to make sure that patients continue to receive the medicine they need over the difficult months ahead, and we have confidence in those measures. We're also confident that the flow of vaccines will be protected. We've implemented a wide range of measures to support businesses across all sectors of the Scottish economy. Our enterprise agencies are providing targeted advice and guidance to companies that are likely to encounter operational and financial challenges as a result of both EU exit and COVID-19. Our multi-agency Prepare for Brexit website, hosted by Scottish Enterprise, continues to provide advice, sources of financial support and online self-assessment toolkits. Throughout this entire Brexit process, the Scottish Government has sought to engage constructively with the UK Government on preparedness issues. We'll continue, as we've always done, to advocate for the interests of Scottish businesses and of the Scottish people wherever possible. However, I must be entirely straight with this Parliament and with the people of Scotland. Regardless of whether we exit transition with a low deal or a no deal, jobs and living standards will be hit hard. And there are many things that we simply do not know, though they will change in 8 days' time. For example, we still do not know any detail on the complex issues such as rules of origin requirements. If a deal is agreed, rules of origin are essential in gaining preferential market access. We still do not know what the rules are for importing and exporting industrial goods between Scotland and the EU, and whether there will be an agreement on mutual recognition of conformity or specific provisions for individual sectors. We don't yet know if there will be a data adequacy decision and when this would be in place. Even if there is one, there will now be a gap. And we don't know how long that will last for, or whether there will be bridging mechanisms in place that cover data flows to the business sector in Scotland. What is certain, however, is that red tape and the costs of doing business will massively increase, with UK-wide customs declarations estimated to go up by a staggering £215 million. Scottish food and drink businesses will face damaging and expensive new paperwork requirements, including export health certificates, as goods will be subject to separate regulation in the UK and the EU. Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government does understand how difficult and damaging EU exit will be for Scottish businesses. That's why we will continue to engage closely with them and to implement the wide range of measures I outlined in detail in this and my previous statement. As soon as information becomes available from the UK Government, we will ensure refreshed advice and guidance is available through our Prepare for Brexit website. We have been engaging with the UK Government to advocate specific Scottish needs for a no deal or a low deal, and in border planning particularly. But we've had this week to remind the UK Government that we've already been assured that fresh seafood exports would be prioritised in the event of traffic delays at the Short Straits crossing. The UK Government must urgently therefore set out further details on how these arrangements will operate and put them into effect, even though the business highlight and absolute necessity of the Christmas trade has been lost by so many. We're also working with partners to develop traffic management contingency plans for South West Scotland, including plans for HGVs should capacity at Cairnryan and the Loch Ryan ports be exceeded. The plan is owned by the Dumfries and Galloway Local Resilience Partnership and will provide further details in due course. Presiding Officer, Scotland didn't vote for any of this, and it is with profound and deep regret that we find ourselves in this position today of all days, and at this difficult time of all times. The solution for Scotland, of course, is to choose its own future as an independent nation within the EU, and we can decide on making that choice in less than 5 months at the Holyrood election. Meantime, we will do everything we can to support and help all who live in Scotland at this difficult time. We'll continue to keep this chamber updated. We'll also redouble our efforts to make sure all our neighbours, understand that we aspire to a better future and are working to achieve it. Presiding Officer, this is not over. There are still difficult times ahead, but we believe we are as best prepared for them as we can be. and that despite the present darkness, we should look forward with anticipation and confidence to our future.
The Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on the issues raised in his statement, and I'll allow around 20 minutes. It'd be helpful if members who wish to ask a question would press the request to speak buttons now, please, and it would be very helpful if members in the chamber could check that they have inserted their cards into the consoles on their desk. Thank you. First of all, Dean Lockhart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank the Cabinet Secretary for an advance copy of his statement. The Cabinet Secretary continues to suggest that the disruption we're seeing at Dover is a precursor to Brexit. But this disruption has nothing to do with Brexit. It's the result of a unilateral decision taken by French authorities without notice to close their borders because of COVID, and this situation has now thankfully been resolved. And if we do reach a trade deal with the EU, which I hope we do before the end of this month, because EU trade negotiations always go down to the wire, we will have full access to the single market. But the question today is whether the SNP will support such a trade deal, because in recent weeks we've heard conflicting answers from the First Minister, the Cabinet Secretary and others on whether they will support a free trade deal with the EU. That's not surprising, Presiding Officer, because we know that deep down the SNP is against free trade, having failed to support every single trade deal in the last 15 years, including UK trade deals with Canada, Japan and Singapore, all of which are important markets for Scottish exports. So let me ask the Cabinet Secretary, I've got two questions for him. First, will the SNP support a free trade deal with the EU, yes or no? And second, why has the SNP failed to support every single trade deal over the past 15 years?
Michael Russell.
Oh dear. These are the questions that Mr Lockhart asked me the last time I made this statement. Since then, we've seen the spectacle of Scottish goods not being able to get out of the country. Since then, I've had constituents who've lost thousands, tens of thousands of pounds as a result of that. Since then, there has been no movement in the trade talks whatsoever. And yet, the dismal questioning continues. Now, I want to say three things to Dean Lockhart. This is a season of goodwill, so I'll do them less forcefully than I might otherwise have felt I should do them. There are noises off, Presiding Officer, but I hope those noises off which are coming from a member with strong Orkney connections. He should remember the damage being done to the Orkney trade by what is happening at the present moment. And when he returns to Orkney, I'm sure there will be people who will wish to remind him of that. Firstly, let it make it clear that I cannot imagine that the current situation would have arisen had the UK been in good standing and been a full member of the EU. The reality is that the UK is on the cusp of becoming, well, it is a third country, it's simply in a transition arrangement. And therefore, to say that there is no connection whatsoever between what we've seen and what is taking place is not true. But equally, if there was no connection, it should still illustrate what may and could happen as a result of no deal. So even if you were the firmest Brexiteer and you saw no connection at all, you should read a lesson out of it. Now, the second thing I would want to say is that if the UK brings back to the House of Commons, brings this chamber a full access to the single market agreement, a remarkable thing apparently that's to happen, it's not being negotiated, it's already been ruled out, but apparently, according to Dean Lockhart, who clearly is in daily contact with David Frost, this is apparently what is going to take place. If there is a proposal to be in the single market, in fact, I'll be generous today as it's Christmas, even if it's not a proposal to be in the customs union as well, I would encourage my Westminster colleagues to support membership of the single market. I think that is not what will be brought. And finally, I support free trade. This party supports free trade. This government supports free trade. This chamber supports free trade. And we all know that that is the case. So what we saw today is what we also saw yesterday from Mr Lockhart. It is a rather unpleasant way of peddling half-truths. It's a rather unpleasant way of partially quoting things and then trying to attack others. I wish him the compliments of the season. I also wish him a better approach in 2021.
Anna Sarwar.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for early sight of his statement. We are 8 days away from the end of the transition period. 8 days, and still no remorse or no forgiveness from the Scottish Conservative Party. This is a disgrace and it is unforgivable. This would be unacceptable behaviour at any time, but it is even worse when we're in the midst of a global pandemic, when thousands of our fellow citizens have lost their lives and hundreds of thousands risk losing their livelihoods. It is unforgivable. I agree with the Cabinet Secretary and the Scottish Government that this is a shambles of Boris Johnson's making and the Tories' making. I agree that this will cost jobs, it will damage living standards and it will diminish our place in the world. But I'm seeking consensus on more than one issue with the Cabinet Secretary. I think we have to collectively put the national interest first, and that is to not compile chaos and division with more chaos and division. Instead, can we work together in the national interest to protect jobs, to bring our country together and focus on our COVID recovery, not on another divisive referendum? I will work together with the Cabinet Secretary on that. Will he commit that promise today?
Michael Russell.
Well, as ever with Mr Sarwar's contribution, it was good in parts. Can I say that I agree with him entirely on the issue of the Conservative Party? I do think it is astonishing that they have not taken to heed a remark indeed from a former leader of the Labour Party, that remark of Clement Attlee's when saying to a departing member of his cabinet, a period of silence would be in order. And I think that that is exactly what we should have heard. It is too much perhaps to expect the Tories to apologise, although there are good Conservatives. Well, I can see 2 out of the 4 on the benches. There are good Conservatives, and I'm sure they feel embarrassed by the people they're sitting amongst. So a period of apology would be welcome, or even silence. On the question of a referendum, no, I'm sorry to disappoint. Not just Mr Sarwar, there was enthusiastic clapping from the leader of the Liberal Democrats, who is on a bit of a roll on the issue of Independence Day. He clearly woke up this morning and thought that was the theme that he wished to follow during the day, and I look forward to his question. The reality of the situation is that what this pandemic presents us, and indeed what Brexit presents us with, is a choice. Is a choice of how we move forward, and whether we move forward having decisions made for us and choices made for us by the UK Tories, because that's where we are presently, and by a UK system that has failed us and that has not told us the truth and did not tell us the truth during the referendum in 2014, or whether we trust amongst ourselves the talent across this chamber. I include Mr Sarwar in that. Whether amongst ourselves we choose to make those decisions and to move ourselves forward. And Mr Rennie too. If we make those decisions wisely amongst ourselves, then we can have a very prosperous future.
Okay, we'll move now to open questions. Can I say I've got quite a few. I doubt if I'll get through them all, but please ask succinct questions and let's have some succinct answers. Joan McAlpin, please, followed by Jamie Halcrow-Johnson.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. The Culture, Tourism, Europe and External Affairs Committee recently published a report pointing out that business will be outside the customs union and face significant regulatory and bureaucratic burdens, even if the UK managed to secure an 11th hour bare bones deal with the EU. For example, business doesn't even know yet what rules of origin requirements it must comply with. This does not mean membership of the single market, whatever Mr Lockhart is trying to say. It does mean queues of lorries could become a permanent feature at our borders. Does the Minister agree with the committee's recommendation that the very least business deserves is for the UK Government to request a period of grace, effectively an extension of transition, to avoid this calamity?
Michael Russell.
I do agree.
Well, that was useful. Thank you, Mr Russell. Jamie Halcrow-Johnson, followed by Annabel Ewing.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Scotland's important fishing industry is looking forward to the United Kingdom becoming an independent coastal state and regaining control of our waters. But while the Cabinet Secretary's former party leader, Alex Salmond, used to believe that it was, and I quote, imperative that we remove the dead hand of Brussels mismanagement as soon as possible from our fishing sector, isn't it true that Mr Russell and his SNP colleagues would take Scotland's fishermen straight back into the hated common fisheries policy just as soon as they can?
Michael Russell.
What the SNP Scottish Government will do is take the produce from Scottish producers straight into the European market, something that the Tories have stopped happening. the reality of the situation is that was a fatuous question, and it was a fatuous question because even the Tories now realise they are going to sell out the Scottish fishing industry as they've sold out everybody else. But the object lesson is this week. The object lesson is this week, that what we have seen is companies suffering enormously. Fishing companies, which I represent in my constituency. If Mr Harcourt-Johnson stops shouting for a moment, perhaps I will be able to get something through to him. Fishing companies in my constituency, which I represent, which are on the brink of bankruptcy because of the Tories. A period of silence would be in order.
Annabel Ewing, followed by Pauline McNeill. Mr Harcourt-Johnson, please. Mr Harcourt-Johnson, you're seated, so you shouldn't be chuntering away and disrupting everyone while you're seated. Annabel Ewing, followed by Pauline McNeill.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Leaving to one side the wrongs of forcing EU citizens living here to apply for rights they already have, will the Cabinet Secretary take this opportunity to urge those who have not yet done so, including in my constituency of Cowdenbeath across Scotland, to apply a settlement scheme? And what message does the Scottish Government have for those EU citizens who have chosen to make Scotland their home?
Michael Russell.
I do entirely agree that anyone who hasn't applied should apply and should apply within the timescale. It is immensely regrettable what has taken place and very upsetting to people, and that again lies at the door of the Tories, unfortunately. But I would encourage them to apply. And the message is you're very welcome, you're contributing wonderfully well. We're delighted that you have made this place your home, and we want you to stay here. And we hope before too long that we're all back in the EU and some sense has returned to the situation.
Can I remind members the meaning of succinct questions, please? And can we have Pauline McNeill, followed by Stuart McMillan. Excuse me, Miss McNeill, but we can't Miss McNeill? Good. We can't hear you. There appears to be a problem. So what I'm going to do is go on to Stuart McMillan, and we'll try and come back to you. Stuart McMillan, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, with a no deal now likely, how many Scottish manufacturing jobs are now estimated to have been lost, and what is the estimated overall impact upon the Scottish economy?
Michael Russell.
The sheer complexity of supply chains, Presiding Officer, for components makes the full impact of EU exit extremely difficult for companies to estimate. Undoubtedly, no deal makes that calculation impact more difficult and even worse. Paul Sheeran, the CEO of Scottish Engineering, said in evidence to Parliament in November at the External Affairs Committee that there will be a substantial impact, but even he could not say precisely what that would be. With manufacturing counting for about 169,000 jobs in Scotland, it's vital we do everything we can to protect the sector, but there will be job losses.
Can I please call Willie Rennie?
The Cabinet Secretary's statement was just a long list of reasons why we should not follow independence after Brexit. That would not be to learn the lessons. But on a point of consensus, I'm a particular supporter of the European arrest warrant, which has helped track down criminals right across Europe and return them to justice. So what efforts is the Scottish Government making to maintain good relationships with criminal justice authorities and the police forces across Europe so criminals have nowhere to hide?
Michael Russell.
On the second point, the member is absolutely right that we need to make sure the relationships between the police forces, between the prosecutors, between the legal systems continue to be maintained. Fortunately, we have a Chief Constable who wishes to do that, a Lord Advocate who wishes to do that, a government that wishes to do that. So a lot of effort is going in to make sure those are, the disadvantages are mitigated to whatever way is possible. And he will recognise, in a legal system, it is not completely possible to do so because there is a structure. The law is the law, but he is right about that. On the first point, well, I have to agree to differ. It is a difference between a glass half full and a glass half empty. He looks at the list that I've given and thinks that, of course, there is a problem with it. I look at the list and think that convinces me that we must do something about that problem. And the solution to that problem lies in the hands of the people of Scotland. Thank goodness. What he should do is support their right to say so.
We'll have Ross Greer next, please, followed by Maureen Watt.
Thank you. The Erasmus Plus scheme has been of immense benefit to young people in Scotland, particularly those who attend colleges and youth groups in some of our most deprived communities. But the UK Government apparently doesn't want to continue with full participation. Could the Scottish Government use some of the goodwill that's been generated for Scotland in the capitals of Europe and in Brussels and make a direct request for full Scottish participation in the scheme if the UK Government are not willing to negotiate for that on our behalf?
Michael Russell.
The member is right to say that the UK Government have refused to negotiate even a partial deal that involves Scotland and Wales, for example, which, although the Welsh Government and ourselves have been at one on that, and Northern Ireland is keen on it too. He makes a good point. It's not possible, alas, to do that until the decision is made by the UK about what it's going to do. And we know that decision. And we believe that decision is being made, but we don't know the final outcome of it. But I do agree with the member that once we know that decision, if it is a negative decision, then ourselves, and hopefully with Wales and possibly with Northern Ireland, should make a direct approach to Erasmus. It will not be easy to do, but I think the member is saying something that's sensible, and I'd be happy to work with him and like-minded people in the chamber to see whether we could do something.
Maureen Watt, followed by Pauline McNeill.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. James Withers, the CEO of Scotland Food and Drink, has warned that a no-deal Brexit would be an act of huge economic negligence. The Anderson Centre's analysis of Brexit impacts on Scottish agricultural sectors shows that no matter what kind of exit we have from the EU, the challenges for Scottish agriculture will be huge. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary to give his response to the findings of this report and the impact any kind of Brexit will have on this vital part of the Scottish economy?
Michael Russell.
I agree with James Withers. He's been arguing some very important points this week, I have to say, too, about the difficulties at the short straits, and I very much support him. The Anderson Centre's report is thoughtful. It sets out the challenges and risks faced by the agricultural sector. It points out that no deal would be hugely damaging, and there will be substantial and lasting impacts to overall Scottish agricultural output. The risks and potential impacts of a no deal beyond the end of the transition period are well documented. They're well backed up by this report, but I would also contend that a low deal is also going to be very damaging.
Pauline McNeill, followed by Peter Chapman.
Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that it is a mistake for the Scottish Tories to support this going down to the wire that Dean Lockhart just justified earlier, being so close to a potentially disastrous no deal with food prices and living standards being impacted on? But can the Cabinet Secretary also say more about the £100 million fund for vulnerable communities and how he thinks that it might help ordinary families if there are rising food costs, which looks like they're likely to be?
Michael Russell.
Yes, I mean, I think the remark that EU talks always go down to the wire is highly irresponsible. Going down to the wire means people not knowing 8 days beforehand what's going to happen to their businesses. I mean, that's, in my view, nonsense. In terms of the £100 million fund, I'd be very happy to get the Aileen Campbell, the relevant Cabinet Secretary, to write to the member, but I know there is a long list of allocations to fund and applications that are being made, and it is designed to get as close to communities as possible and as close to individuals as possible, and particularly those individuals who will be most disadvantaged. And the member well knows, because she's very knowledgeable in these areas, the people who will be worst affected are those who are furthest from society. It is a very, very difficult position for them, and we'll do our best to help them.
Peter Chapman.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. During his statement, the Cabinet Secretary made much of the fact that with days to go till the end of the transition period, no deal has been done. I am likewise anxious that we still have no deal. But unlike Mr Russell, I don't blame our negotiating team for that state of affairs. And even he must realise it always takes two to do a deal. So will the Cabinet Secretary join with me in condemning the completely unrealistic demands that the EU has made for continued unfair access to our fishing waters, and their expectation that the UK would then sign a deal which would mean that we would be the only independent country in the world that didn't control its own fishing waters?
Michael Russell.
Mr Chapman cannot know unless he has been told by the negotiators, and I doubt whether that's the case, to be honest, without being unkind to Mr Chapman, what the proposals are. But I can say to him that I want the best deal possible for everyone involved, so that we can get the best deal for Scotland. And therefore I join with him, if he would at any stage argue, that what we want is a deal that is fair to the people of Scotland, that produces long-term results and does not create an enormous amount of bad feeling. What he's trying to say, however, is this is all the fault of somebody else and not the fault of the party of which he is a representative, then he is utterly wrong. Brexit is a disaster owned by the Conservatives. I'm glad he's nodding, and they must take responsibility for it, including himself.
Can squeeze in a short question, please, from Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Cabinet Secretary for Finance Kate Forbes wrote to the Chancellor requesting more funding from the UK Government following the announcement of a £400 million post-Brexit support package for Northern Ireland, which has already been given a comprehensive advantage over Scotland in Brexit deliberations. Pro rata, Scotland should receive £1.4 billion. What has been the UK Government's response?
Can we have a short answer, please, from the Cabinet Secretary?
There hasn't been one, and I really think that is very negligent of them, but they are negligible too. As that is the final question, Presiding Officer, can I wish everybody a happy Christmas? Even the Conservatives, despite the fact they've done their best to ruin it.
That concludes questions on the Cabinet Secretary's statement, and we'll move on to the next item of business.